De Capua. Thank you for joining us here on the 11th of October 2016. This is Performance Engineering Education brought to you by Vivint. Wanted to provide a very quick introduction. There is a Performance Engineering SIG or Special Interest Group, which there's four of us that lead this group, myself, Petar Puskarich, as well as Paul Shovlin and Chris Trimper. So the four of us helped to lead this year. In 2016, we've been doing these monthly webinars to go ahead and bring experts to you on very relevant topics. Today, we've got the opportunity to have a list of four top panelists or experts that I would see in the world today around performance engineering. I will briefly introduce you to each of them. First, we've got Wilson Marr. He is now the DevOps superhero. I heard that last week at Star West, he had the opportunity to have a cape on as well from Jet Bloom. Also at Star West was Jonathan Rice, which is now the Chief Data Therapist at CA Technologies. We also have Eric Progler from SOSTA. He focuses on a number of different areas, including product manager for their product called CloudTest. And then myself, I am now at an organization called CSC. We go by CSC Global. I have the opportunity to lead our technology and product innovation teams. So with that, I will go ahead and just give a few little housekeeping items. This is a live session. It is being recorded. All of these recordings are available to all Vivint members. We will try to have a session Q&A, although I will caveat it that we will be moving rather quickly today. With all the content we wanted to share with you, we'll be moving at about 1 minute per slide. We will also incorporate 5 different polls where we will ask you to very promptly respond so that we can move quickly. And as we go through and do this, again, here's the control panel. You'll see the questions and answers area. This is where you will go ahead and input any questions that you might have for this panel. And again, if we do not have time to get to them, stay tuned, because as we normally do, we will update the blog with the questions. We'll also have a link to the video. We will also have a link to a PDF of this deck so that you can go back and reference any of the content with the links that we've provided for you. So we're going to get started with our first poll right out of the gate. I also wanted to just share, I mean, we're all excited about this, and really the objective today is to share with you the huge depth and breadth of performance engineering and specifically education around performance engineering. So again, we're going to kick off with the first poll. I know, Jonathan, you'll be helping navigating us through all 5 of these polls. So Jonathan, over to you.
Fantastic. Okay, well, the poll's in progress at the moment, so we're looking for people to just provide a bit of feedback. Once we've got to a sensible percentage, we'll kind of close that off. So really the first poll is all around where do you find the best source for education right now. So this could be your background, this could be, you know, you've done a master's or a research project around performance engineering. This could be internal. You know, this seems to be the one that's in the lead at the moment. It's kind of 60% of you have found that it's internal on-site, internal off-site kind of training, mentoring. And then the mentorship, which is the bottom one, is coming in as a close second at the moment. And then, as we'd expect, you've seen the vendor training and the internal kind of off-site third-party provider providing you with that information and support. So, okay, we're going to close the poll now. And I think we've validated those numbers as we thought they were going to be. So that you should all be able to see those numbers right now. So it seems that, you know, internally is where you find out most of the information. And as we kind of expected, there's not really any specific kind of degree or kind of universities that are kind of providing these kind of courses. So, you know, getting the mentorship coming in second, and then, you know, vendor training is where you find your source. So let's move it back over to Todd.
Great, thank you very much, Jonathan. Again, our agenda for today, very, very high level. So performance engineering education is what we're talking about. We have four of us as panelists that are going to be going through and presenting a point of view, starting with Wilson, then going to Jonathan, then Eric, and myself. We may have a little bit of a chance for a Q&A, and then we're going to be signing off with a thank you. So without further ado, Wilson, I'm going to turn it over to you. And I guess I'm interested to learn is based on those poll results, any insights that maybe you were expecting to see that you didn't see, or any thoughts that you'd want to share just on education and maybe where you could find some of those things today?
Yeah, you know, thanks, Todd. You know, I wasn't surprised to see it. Can you hear me?
I can. I jumped the gun a little bit, so I'm trying to move at a very high speed. But you know what, Jonathan? Why don't we go back? That poll results, as you look at that, I mean, is that what you're expecting? And then Wilson, we'll get your thoughts there too.
Okay.
Absolutely, that's exactly what I was thinking. And you know, when I caught up with Wilson last week in California, we discussed this about, you know, how do you get those performance engineering discipline? You know, where do you learn about this stuff? And I think this is where, you know, Wilson's first section is really going to cover off at some interesting background about how it's not just performance testing. This is, you know, you've obviously looked at the book, which will be, you know, there's some great sources we're going to talk about at the end, and some of the communities that you can reach out to. But you know, this is, you know, the effective performance engineering stuff. There's a lot of lessons and a lot of knowledge to be sharing, and that's why we're going to fly through this to kind of whet your appetite to, you know, how do we find out more. So I'll hand over to Wilson.
Yeah, thank you. You know, the thing I've noticed about the poll is the big fat zero for the PhD and even the master's program. There really isn't one that is of a practical level. I mean, there's some theoretical ones out there that is part of, you know, other computer science or others, but really none that I know of that is very, you know, brass tacks, you know, in terms of, you know, getting people going like a dev camp. And I hope to get going on one, and specifically in DevOps, and I'm working towards that. But let me jump into this slide here next to finish my thought here. The question always comes up in education versus training versus just, you know, trying to figure things out, is this slide is from a discussion. The techniques, the learning techniques slide, is from a discussion that frequently comes up. Is why take the classes? You know, I've been training, you know, certified trainer on LoadRunner for many, many years. You know, one of the first ones since Mercury. And you know, I realized that even though the company paid for the training, a lot of people don't even show up, and because, you know, they are, you know, for one reason or another. But I think that the key for any kind of, you know, investment in the training has to be why. You know, this, because what I try to do in my training here, above and beyond what HP offers, is a meticulously sequenced learning. I think it's really important. That's really the biggest value that I've gone through and thought over many, many months of figuring out how can we sequence this thing so that way people can pick it up and not have problems. And to help them with that, you know, it's important to have like diagrams that I have, and I make, you know, diagrams and put them in video form on YouTube that people can see, that reveals them, you know, a little at a time, so that way it's digestible. The other thing I think that people need in today's world especially is runnable scripts, because oftentimes especially in DevOps, you know, the whole deal now is that you can automate things. And so this is the same thing with education. You know, I also did a course in Disneyland last week on GitHub and Git, and that was really a central part, where instead of I'm telling people to type things out, you know, I can show them that step by step in a script that's automated, that they can then change those commands and be able to see the sequence. And I think, you know, any kind of education, it's important for that kind of element to agree on. And then, of course, then, you know, there's some commentary on the scripts, so that way people can understand, hands-on, be able to make those changes. Because that's really what happens in a lot of situations. You know, you jump in and you're working with other people's code. So I think that any kind of education really ought to focus on that skill of diagnosing what other people have written and figure out what the problem is, so that way you have it's a real skill, and it takes some creativity and it takes a lot of training to be able to, pick up somebody else's stuff, right? I call it wearing somebody else's underwear. Okay, and also too, I think these pro tips are very important that people have told me that highlight, here's what you're supposed to have learned out of all of this, and then to confirm, we would have quizzes to make sure. There are a lot of people are saying, well, okay, well, what's wrong with just looking at full overstack, the Stack Overflow? But a lot of people are being forced into being what we call a full Stack Overflow developer or DevOps person, rather than a full stack, just regular full stack. And I think the reason why that's an issue for a lot of people that really run into a mess is because they're, if you look at these social forums like Stack Overflow, they're often conflicting and contradictory answers. And people, after reading them, end up being more confused than they ever were before they start reading it. So I think, that really is a big issue or a big reason why you want to go to somebody who can, lay things out for you ahead of time and be able to save you some, headache and, wrong answers because there are so many contradictory answers in social forums. Right? Now, on the next slide, what I have here is the, as an example of what we do, and here's some techniques here. So one of the things I start doing is, even before a session, I call everybody and make sure that they work through their installation of the software. And that's really a crucial aspect. It's part of the education, because half of the time you would have, the class, on a one-day class, it would be spent purely on installation. And that was the case with Selenium's class. It was the case with my GitHub class. That's the case with LoadRunner class, because there's so many aspects and there's so many different options now in today's world of you to do an installation. That's kind of a class in of itself on here. So any class that you guys would take, I would suggest you see if you can get installation out of the way, or have the expectation that installation is a big part of the class. At least half a day, if not a full day, on getting all those things going. So that way, when you're getting back together as a group, then you can focus on the content and, making changes like, I talked about. Okay. Now, there are many, many slides on here that I have. I won't go through every single one of these, but the next slide here, under 13, Todd, is the single user variability test results. And so one of the aspects that I think is important in any kind of education is real-world examples. Real-world examples, that, for example, here in terms of when you look at in our performance, the first thing I do is run what I call a network variability test just on the login, right? Even if you just only hit the server that has come up, what I do is, run that, and so that way I can see all kinds of things. And so, in my class, what I do is explain what all of the different reasons why you see a spike. And oftentimes I use this as a, in projects, I use this as a calling card to the network people. Because oftentimes you've got to get act of Congress to talk to some of these guys. And with this kind of information, we would be able to say, hey, here's proof that something is wrong and I need to talk to these network people in order to make things, figured out. And so this is an example, by the way, of an agile approach, because that's really the key in what's called agile, rather than doing a waterfall where you're just waiting till the end to figure out things out. What I try to do in an agile kind of environment is I do this to a production server right off the bat, so that way I can expose processes, which is at the core of performance tuning and performance engineering in the agile mode. That's different than in an old waterfall mode, is that we are more focused on exposing process issues going to production as we are in the technical aspects of what a program does inside a single server. All right, I'm going to skip through a couple of these ones here, and number 16 here, I think is really a interesting thing, is that we have Docker, for example, that's come up. Why, in terms of answering the question, well, it worked on my machine, right? But there's a lot of other aspects on here aside from just the operating system being installed. there's this provisioning and the whole aspects of manual and being a error-prone process. And I think that's really the revolution that's going on in the world, is that we have automation going on to automatically create these servers. And that's where the cloud value comes in, is that when you need a server, scripts are automatically fired to get these new servers up. And especially over time, as you run into problems, as your monitor finds problems, those automation scripts also bring those servers down and bring others up. So what we have here is that, even though we have different configurations between development and QA and staging servers and production, we need to still have a way of figuring out the delivery of good stuff or bad stuff into production and finding if there's issues, right? Even though we have different configurations going into various, the various, aspect of things, right? Number 17 here, the coexistence. I think this is another very important aspect that a lot of people, don't understand as far as, with self-education, is that the differentiation right off the bat, that, a lot of times, I find, I don't know if the other guys, Eric and all that, have you seen that, when you're, most of the time, it's the authentication that really determines the capacity of your entire system. Have you guys found that to be true?
Well, then there's the difficulty that you're usually sharing that resource with something else. So even if you can get it set up in your test environment, there's other testing projects that are also exercising authentication. So yeah, it's definitely a variable. Spin the barrel.
Exactly. Yeah, and the same thing. I would say probably 80% of the time that I work with these SAP massive enterprise projects, it's the stuff that's supposed to just work. They don't. Like, for example, the load balancers. Everybody says, well, we just should have enough. But sure enough, we put a certain amount in, it's turned out to be load balancer, and people go like, well, we should have the capacity. Well, there's a difference between should and not, right? And I think that's really one of the key things that experience can give us that needs to be inside. And a lot of times is that you can dig through all of Stack Overflow and not find the root causes of this, because a lot of times the experience of root causes are not put up in Stack Overflow. It's just not mentioned because it's such technical level that the strategy aspects from experience are often left out. That's what I found, with it. So now in today's world, all of these stuff. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry, I don't want to cut you too short, but I know that we have a ton of content. So maybe if we want to highlight just a few, and then we'll take a quick poll before Jonathan starts up.
Okay, yeah, just give me one more minute and I'll finish up here. The other aspect of this is these time budgets that we have. And I think a lot of people say, well, it's difficult to getting an SLA. But I found that, the market dictates. And so what I found is that part of this education we need to give to these guys is that what to do if you're not given the information from management or whoever else. A lot of times we have to set things up. We have to put up the information in order to to make it work. And so, for example, if we're not given SLAs, then we have to make some up and says, okay, this is what our assumption is based upon our experience in other projects or through our education. So anyway, so those are the main aspects that I have in terms of why you want to get some real education rather than just throwing people to the wind. Is this pro tips that you probably wouldn't get any other way. All right. So anyway, so that's my thinking on this whole matter.
Thank you, Wilson, and again, I apologize for having to cut you short. If you guys have not heard of Wilson, he is one of the leading experts around performance engineering. He's now the DevOps superhero. So again, I'm going to clip through just a few of these slides. I know there's a lot more that we could talk through, but as we've shared, these will be available offline And again, if you go to the blog site, there's links. Our names are actually linked to our Twitter handles, so you will go ahead and be able to access us directly as well. So again, a lot of great content. Wilson, I really appreciate your participation in sharing these items with us around performance engineering education. And again, we will have all of this available to everyone. So just a great opportunity, I think, here to get the four minds. With that, Jonathan, I don't know if you could launch poll number 2 for us.
Sure, absolutely. So I think we're gonna go into this nice and easy, and thanks Wilson for all that great content. You know, we've had one of the questions come through already around will this content be available, and I've sent out the link to the HP community site. It's also going to be available on the CA community site as well. So, you know, those links will be provided afterwards. I'm opening up the questions now around, you know, what kind of standards and practices do you use to kind of educate your stakeholders, and you know, I think this was a really interesting one because you know, there is mention of performance testing and engineering in the new ISO standard, which was just launched last year, and also some references in the 9001. And really, we were just kind of saying, well, how many people are using those definitions, and would they benefit from an upcoming performance engineering specific standard, which I know there's a number of us in the community who are looking at. And then secondly was around, you know, where else do you get these kind of these terms from? Are they from external entities like ourselves who are talking around it or providing consulting or expertise, or is it internal best practice? And what we're going to close the poll now, but you know, there's a staggering number which is saying that actually this is mainly internally, you know, generated. So it's, you know, your center of excellence, it's the teams that you work with, it's the terminology that you work with, and not a very small reliance on kind of industry standards, and also external third parties who can potentially provide you the training, like Wilson does independently, you know, provide you, you know, the basis of such a huge landscape. So I'm going to move on to some of my content quickly here, and you know, I think after the last conversation, the first poll, you know, we've come at it a slightly different thing. You know, I've been spending probably since the 90s when I started with Loader and the Java plugins, and you know, partly when I started this there was very limited amount of terminology that was out there. Obviously, non-functional requirements and some basic terminology for load stress, so baseline, you know, these kind of standard terms that were around in the industry. But actually what we're seeing now from an education point of view is, you know, a lot of the guys that I work with in my team are, you know, come from a non-IT background. They're applied maths, applied physics. They're used to doing these kind of modeling exercises, whether that be using tools like MATLAB, or, you know, I've got a guy who's just done his PhD in geology, and you know, they're used to using these kind of modeling techniques. So my big question for the industry was, well, you know, why aren't we doing this? You know, why haven't we got that kind of basis? You know, we're sending some research grads out at the moment to look at performance engineering as a topic. So, you know, I'm going to talk over 2 areas, and actually this stuff is quite old, so which is what I like about it. So if I move on to the next slide, you know, I stood up and did a keynote for the British Computer Society back in 2011, and I kind of put out this whole, you know, how do you understand these huge landscapes, and how do you, you know, map many non-functional requirements to a high-level business requirement. And I use this as a business level question. That could be, you know, will the ETL finish within an 8-hour window, which could be made up of hundreds of non-functional requirements mapping. So, you know, partly what I wanted to express was, you know, how's this communication got so difficult without standards being there, that, you know, we're talking to people in the example here in a standard ATTD statement. You know, part of it is saying, you know, as a particular persona, you know, I'm going to need that credit score within 5 minutes. You know, is that going to be okay? And then what happens is somebody comes back saying, yep, that's fine. You know, I ran this particular load runner scenario and it came out, it maxed out at 322 seconds, which is fine at 98 users. But it's not really the terminology that a business really understands, especially when we're looking at risk and value of what we're trying to achieve. So if I move on to the next slide, you know, one of my presentation that I did last week at StarOS, which is still available on the virtual conference, you know, I kind of said, well, actually, everything's just a node, and you know, this was quite controversial because partly what I was saying is a node could be a message, it could be a UI, it could be, you know, some kind of database, whatever that node is. You have to understand and be able to model those complex ecologies or ecosystems of huge complex systems. If you look at landscapes for things like SAP, which I've done performance engineering on, it's hugely complex. And the example which I'm going to give is from one of the biggest ESAP implementations within Europe. And you know, part of that challenge was how do you relate and visualize that understanding so that way you can get people into the right time, under the business owners who kind of say, okay, this component is not performing correctly and potentially going to have this impact on these critical scenarios, which are going to potentially impact revenue or even the brand recognition. So, you know, partly I'm going to move on quickly, but you know, part of that next slide was about you know, understanding that relationship between a non-functional requirement and all the great stuff which you know, Wilson kind of pulled out really is understanding that traceability all the way from a question, which we see at the top here, to an actual measurement, which could be a single transaction that proves that, but part of that will be a number of different scenarios with a number of different interfaces with background traffic and ambient noise traffic. You know, it's not just focusing on the standard UI stuff. So part of what we were trying to do is visualize this, and you know, part of what I've talked about, the whole node modeling side of things, is if you understand and can model your system, then you can identify those pain points which you need to investigate and understand a little bit more. And that's kind of where Wilson had provided those kind of great flows of, you know, how you dig deeper and do the hard, you know, the analysis and the tuning exercise, which typically doesn't happen. And really part of this, if we go into the next slide, is to summarize how we're going back to the business and actually responding in the same language that they understand and provide that assurance about what they are doing and saying, well, actually, I understand the context and the domain that you're talking about, and actually I can give you a level of confidence that it doesn't matter if even if everybody was logging in at the same time, it'd still be back in 5 minutes. So that is that kind of how do we get back to the business. So I'm calling this kind of the very shift left, kind of understanding the requirements traceability. And then on the opposite side thing, which I'm going to skip through very quickly, is then the shift right kind of view is, you know, how do you understand that what you've modeled and what you've proven with, you know, as requirements is actually what's happening in the real world. Now, again, what I love about all this content is, you know, part of the stuff what I just talked about 5 years ago, you know, I also, PAL's been around for a long time, you know, this Performance Application Lifecycle tool, which is a free tool that you can download as part of the additional components on the second CD of the Load Runner CD. You know, part of it allows you to run a very simple, very powerful tool that allows you to import from logs from your real-world systems from any kind of source, whether that be your JBoss logs or that could be some kind of messaging system, to create and validate the right level of mix to kind of go back to that shift left and say, well, actually what we were proving from a hypothesis point of view is actually validated with real usage. So on the left-hand side, you can see real user monitors, you can see Google Analytics, you can talk Apache. You know, I spoke about the, you know, things like Splunk and APM and all these great tools that you can actually pull that information to validate that actually what you thought was going to happen in your scenarios is going to actually happen. And also this helps you to build more realistic scenarios and validate that your scenarios are correct. So if we look at the next slide, you know, everybody who's been using Performance Center, you know, you can import these the PAL results into this scenario, and it will show you what percentage coverage each one of these flows were as part of real usage patterns of a real session with, with a certain amount of usage and a certain amount of users that were on there, and you can use that to generate your scenarios and your more realistic load patterns. So, these are really great opportunities where you can start taking the shift right approach, and, the initial stuff I was talking around is the shift left, and part of that, if we go into the next slide, is allowing you to do this continuous performance testing from day one. Is you build that into your continuous integration platform, so you're proving that you're actually you're building performance engineering in from day one, and then that is part of a local build that runs on your machine. It could then be something like Jenkins, which you can see here. So that way you're continuously validating and building your performance engineering in. You're not waiting till the last minute to actually say, well, actually, is my assumptions and my hypothesis correct? This is continuous assurance and building confidence in the system. So if we go on to the next slide, this is an example of one that I actually did run for a large bank in Hong Kong, which is not difficult to work out who it is. And part of these scenarios were actually were built from the performance application lifecycle. The PALM tool allowed us to look and validate what we were expecting based on real usage of that particular system. So that's a whirlwind 5 minutes flow through to give you some understandings of how to use shift right and to use shift left, and to build some confidence in what you're doing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to hand back over now to the poll.
Thank you, Jonathan. That was great.
Fantastic. So exactly what I've just kind of taken on, part of it is, following that story on, I talked about the fact that, some of my grads that are working in performance engineering are coming from a completely different background. There's applied maths, applied physics. We're really trying to understand if, where did you train? Where did you come in? Was this practical experience, which seems to be, over 90% of you at the moment? Was this something that you started with your IT degree? So it could be a computer science, or in my case, I did computer systems for high performance computing, and that was a specific module around performance. So, I'm seeing that, the polls are kind of coming through. There's quite a lot of percentage of, so we're going to close that now. But as I expected, the biggest ones coming through are, the practical experience that, you've built up over time, and then really your IT degree. So, there's a few of you that have come from those kind of applied maths, physics backgrounds, and some kind of graduate scheme that's got you into performance engineering. But I hope that kind of what we're trying to do with this session is really to encourage people who are graduates, who are coming from college, to really be thinking about a career in performance engineering, which is something which typically doesn't happen. So I'll pass that back over to Todd, who's going to introduce our next speaker.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. I guess, Eric, looking at that poll, when seeking these PE experts and what type of education is important to you and the results that we saw, interested in getting your thoughts on those results, and then Eric, you can drive right into your slides.
Sure. Well, the results have page passed for me too, but what I saw was 91% for anecdotal. There we go. The anecdotal experience, the stories that you've seen. I don't think that there's a way that you can. You don't graduate college ready to be a computer programmer, and you can't come out of an education program ready to be a performance tester. There's some experience that you need. But I'm still in my slides to talk about what sort of education there is to get people to square one, to get them started. So why don't we go ahead to the slides then? So I'm in this picture somewhere. I have the big fluffy beard. It's not so fluffy these days. I came to a performance engineering summit that Todd put on, where we talked about various issues related to performance engineering, and one of the major subjects was performance engineering education. So we did an exercise together where we brainstormed about what are the day one requirements to teach somebody to be a performance tester. As we compared our experiences, some of us had been functional testers, Some of us have been developers. I mean, there were a number of different paths to becoming a performance tester, but none of these would give you all of the background that you needed to get going. So we have a list of what we think are kind of the beginning list of skills you're going to need to be successful as a performance engineer, to help identify gaps and maybe to help design better education. So let's look at the first component of this, architecture. A performance engineer gets really good at reading a Visio diagram and understanding how a system is laid out, both in terms of understanding where to monitor and in how to design the tests that they need to run. So drawing and interpreting a system diagram is an important skill. Just being able to whiteboard something with an architect who doesn't have any diagram and can't really explain to you how things work, put a whiteboard marker in your hand, start drawing and getting people to tell you you're right or wrong. That's how you're going to get there. The other part of that is all the context that goes around a real live computing environment, all the different things that are going on all the time. Understanding that it's not the exact same environment moment to moment, let alone day to day, let alone version to version. There are things that are changing all the time. By understanding that complexity, you can try to manage it. And then Wilson touched briefly on some of the things that are happening with different ways to dynamically allocate resources. And we seem to be finding ways to put containers inside of containers these days to make it easier to do configuration management, which saves a great deal of people time, but is much more difficult to performance test with because you don't have, without having the steady supply of resources that are useful for comparing one day to another. Understanding those trade-offs is really the only way you can be successful. It's not possible anymore to just say, nope, can't do virtual. That isn't going to work. Next slide, please. So in addition to understanding the ecosystem out in Network Core, understanding something about testing is important. Just the idea of having a proposition, measuring, having a hypothesis, measuring whether that's true, looking at results, and thinking about what they prove or they don't prove. These are the kinds of skills that it really helps to have a science background, because this is getting pretty close to computer science. I mean, a performance test is an experiment. You are attempting to prove that whether something is true or untrue. It's good to have that background to understand the idea of all the different ways that software can fail in ways that aren't obvious. It'd be very hard to design a good performance test if you didn't know how to test. Next one, please. The whole subject of load modeling, this is one of these things where it may not be possible to prepare somebody just with classroom training. There's a lot of things that go into this, both from a test design perspective about understanding what's representative, and then the ways that you could gather data to build your model. It took me a couple of years to get to the point of having my spreadsheet where I was modeling transactions per second over virtual users, over think time, over pacing. This is not something that you can just spit out and put it and give it to a beginner and have them understand what's going on. Really understanding how to make as good of a model as we can for a load test takes some experience and takes some failure, I think, to have a test result not be as predictive as we hoped it would be because of some incorrect assumption or something that got missed. It's always a risk that we're going to, our 80-20 rule for what to include in a performance test is not going to include something critical, or that we will go too low or we'll go too high and then risk our credibility by reporting results that are just not realistic. Running all those sources down, understanding how test data plays into them, these are things you don't get for free. Next slide, please. And of course, the scripting skills. This is probably the easiest thing to build up. But you put somebody in front of Code Project and they'll start to get the idea of how scripting works. But the advanced stuff and living with it, the validations, the pacing, the naming your transactions properly, those are usually painful lessons. Somebody has to not do those things and get burned before they understand why it's worth investing the time in doing them. And everybody's under pressure to do more faster. Things like properly validating your responses are the kinds of things that can be tempting to leave aside until you've seen what the consequences are of doing that. So this sort of experience of seeing a good script, I think that a lot of people think that this is equivalent to being a performance tester, and it really isn't. I've been around people who really understand how to do this stuff, and they're usually pretty dismissive of people who think the first question about load testing is what tool do you use. We still have to get through that. We still have to be able to make a good test, be able to learn anything interesting as a performance engineer. And next, please. Now we jump to the other extreme, the interpreting results. This is the thing where the experience of seeing an authentication store fail back up, as Wilson mentioned, or understanding what it looks like when a database transaction log SAN volume is slowing down, or knowing how to check for that the load balancer is working correctly, which is the most common misconfiguration I've seen in my career anyway. These sorts of things really inform your understanding of when you're looking at a graph. Your brain is good at some pretty specific things, and I'm not a neurologist, but I've read some great stuff about how we are designed to identify patterns and to be able to see things that are interesting. So I do a whole workshop on just looking at graphs and looking for when you see the curve and what the other things that are happening at the time that the knee in the curve occurs. You need some experience to understand what this means. You also need enough experience to not look at a graph and go yell at a VBA based on that graph. You need the experience to put your arm around the VBA and say, hey, so this sort of looks like this is happening here. What do you think? That's a big skill in interpreting results that you're going to need to work with other people. Let's go to the next slide, please. And then the real analysis stuff. You're going to have to be able to not only understand what's going on, but understand it well enough to explain it to other people. For example, without a net, I'll try to explain Little's Law, which is something that kept coming up from everybody who was an experienced performance engineer in the summit. And Little's Law is the idea that it essentially doesn't matter what the arrival rate of work is. It just matters, the throughput is based on the speed at which you can process data. And the best example for this is the grocery store, where you can only check out so many people per hour, no matter how they stand in line, because ultimately they're going to pretty much be waiting to get checked out. Understanding how these queues back up, understanding how people are going to experience any sort of transient or long-term delay in getting to a resource. These are where a performance engineer can really make an impact by being able to explain what's going on and why this is more than just X quantity of resources only consumed 80%, and why that still could be an issue. Next slide, please. Oh, I guess that was it for me. Thanks so much for sticking with me through my section, which had far fewer cool graphs and interesting pictures and process diagrams, but hopefully gives us an understanding of how to get to square one.
Eric, thank you very much for presenting that material, and I think this may be one of the first times that we've started presenting some of the results from that Performance Engineering Summit that a few of us did participate in. So thank you for doing it. It's going to be presented more formally at CMG this fall, and we'll see about getting it published for the community at large by next year. Absolutely. Well, with that said, Jonathan, I don't know if you could launch poll number 4 for us and then talk us through that one.
Sure. So I guess this is just leading on from everything that Eric and Wilson's been saying, really, is, where do you go to find out, information? And obviously we're sharing kind of what we've been doing within the community and the Performance Engineering Summit this year. But, where do you find this information? Are you just going directly and Googling for it? Is there a community site which you're part of? And I know we're going to be sharing later on our Slack community where people can come in and join and collaborate and chat with us around, from a collaboration point of view. Is it something like the book that, again, we're going to be talking about? What Todd did a fantastic book which got published by O'Reilly this year for effective performance engineering. Is that kind of one of those kind of books or ebooks or something that you're reading through, or is it webinar content just similar to what we're doing today, or conferences? So I think the poll's pretty much closed now, and I think they'll validate exactly what we've been thinking about. Part of a lot of high percentage of this is coming from direct search. So that's, you get stuck, you get a weird error, you get, a bit of problems, you go and search on the internet, you might end up in QA forums, you might end up in one of our sites. The other area is the community. So this is what we're trying to encourage, is this: how do we collaborate as a performance engineering community? How can we share stuff, material like the performance engineering book, and do these which I know we've got a number of different events scheduled for the Vivek community coming up in the near future, which we'll be going through later on, and then webinars and conferences. So we're also going to share a couple of conferences that are coming up in the near future, and hopefully you'll be able to attend those. And obviously the CMG is just the one that we just mentioned around that, which is the Computer Measurement Group. So it'd be very interesting to see how you guys can get involved in the future. So with that, I'm going to pass over to Todd, who's going to finish us off with some of that great content.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. And I will just jump right in. So, made of mention was this book, Effective Performance Engineering. I had the opportunity to co-author this with Shane Evans. The reason that I just wanted to share this, again, it's 111 pages. There is a lot of great concepts that are really touched on. This was going to enable you, either as a leader or as a practitioner, to grab some very important concepts that we all know, and how is it that you share them either across your team or upwardly to your technology leadership or your business leadership. Again, it's something that I've been wanting to write, Shane's been wanting to write for a while. We finally got together, and O'Reilly, who I believe is one of the leading publishers in the world in this space, said, yes, we'll go ahead and do that. So HPE had gone ahead and sponsored this book for the first 30 days. In addition, O'Reilly has now made it available, so you can download 3 different electronic version types. Again, if you just follow this bit.ly link, that will go ahead and take you to the website supporting the book, and you can just click on Get Mine Now, and you'll get your own copy. So again, just wanted to get that out to everyone. And normally when I go to a conference, I like to carry some with me. So if you were at Velocity New York, you probably saw me there. And then we'll be planning on doing the same thing here shortly. Also wanted to drive your attention to TechBeacon. So techbeacon.com/performance. You will get all of the latest and greatest on TechBeacon related to performance and performance engineering. TechBeacon was a site that was established a little over a year and a half ago. Readership has just grown immensely. The reason why, I believe, is a majority, 90+% of the people who contribute to the site are practitioners like you and I. One of the studies that I had the opportunity to run and create this asset with was done back in April of 2015. I then published it in, I believe it was November of 2015. But this was the State of Performance Engineering. It's a 43-page ebook. Again, if you follow the bit.ly link here on the bottom left, you'll get an access to that. It's all free. It's a 43-page PDF download having all that great content in there as well, helping you to see other aspects of performance engineering that you might want to take with you. I just wanted to highlight a few conferences. These are some of the performance engineering related conferences. There are a lot of them out there. Velocity I've listed first. They have we did Santa Clara. It was either in June or July. We just did New York 2 or 3 weeks ago. Amsterdam is coming up the beginning of November, and then there's going to be, I believe it's Shanghai later. But the second one down, STPCon. So I know that some of my colleagues, Scott Moore, Mark Tomlinson, James Pulley, they were just there a few weeks ago. Again, another conference that I would encourage people to participate and get engaged in. And lastly, we've got CMG Impact, which you can see is a fairly broad group of people, but from a performance and performance engineering perspective, again, a great conference to participate and get engaged in. That one we've got coming up in early November, and it's going to be down in the San Diego area, La Jolla to be specific. So again, 3 conferences I just wanted to very quickly touch on and share and highlight as ones that, as we think about performance engineering, I would maybe encourage you to participate. Jonathan, I'd like to take a short break here right now just to put poll number 5 up. So if you could quickly read through that, and we'll get some quick feedback, and we'll just pause for right now.
Fantastic. Thanks, Todd. So this is the final panelist feedback. So part of it was to say, well, what would you say the vendors, partners in the performance engine space are? Are they kind of leading the way to contributing to this and feedback to the performance engineering education? Is it more of a following the leaders kind of side of things, or are you finding that they're just a checkbox kind of exercise? It's just tick, performance testing's done, move on to the next stage, or do you think they're not doing anything just yet? So actually we've got a bit of a split poll coming through at the moment. So they're all going across the board, apart from very few on the not doing anything side of things. So if we close that out now, what was the big one that's just which is quite surprising actually, they're seeing that partly their partners and their vendors are just doing the purely checkbox, kind of ticking the box exercise, just to say, yep, performance testing done. And obviously we've got a huge amount of stories that we could share around this, around the risks of just performance testing over performance engineering, not building this in. In a digital landscape with digital transformation, you're going to start seeing a lot more of these, kind of organizations and brands that are going to get massively damaged by this. So I'm going to pass you back over to Todd now to kind of finish off and help where to look next, really.
Great, thank you, Jonathan. So again, I think that those results of kind of checking the box are maybe what a lot of us are feeling today, and one of the other reasons that getting this performance engineering education conversation out there is really because the depth and breadth of performance engineering is very significant. It can't just be a check the box scenario. It's very important for all the reasons that we've all spoken about, but there's a lot of education that is out there. Hopefully you're picking up on that as we clip through these. I know that in one of the previous poll questions we talked about, where do you find these things? Here's a link to an article that was published talking about the 30 top performance engineering leaders to follow on Twitter. So if you do not subscribe to Twitter yet, please do it soon. If you are looking for who are the right people in this space to follow, here's a very quick way to go ahead and do that. If you follow me, which is @perfeng, you will go ahead and see that I've actually created a list that you could just go ahead and subscribe to make it really simple for you to get that information. I think Eric had mentioned that we also have set up a Slack channel. This actually came from when I was at HPE, one of the customers at Discover in Las Vegas in June had said, is there anything like this available? And I said, well, no. And then I think it was the next week or the week after is when we got together with this Performance Engineering Summit, and we all thought, yeah, let's continue the conversation. So invite you all to join us on this fperfeng.slack.com to go ahead and join up and participate in this ongoing conversation. It really started as a way of having a forum of, where is it you can get references, where is it you can get information, and creating this dynamic and real-time or near real-time community. So again, wanted to share that with you as well. Part of what we've been doing here at Vivit Worldwide in 2016, I'd mentioned the second Tuesday of every month, getting people together, having these conversations. As you can see, here are the first 9 of 12. Today marks number 10. And again, links to these available recordings, PDFs of the presentations, all of that is available on the Vivit website. So these links are also going to be available. The other piece I would love to encourage all of you is if you've got this stuff in your head and you just want to share it with people, we've got a call for speakers survey. We've got 2 more sessions left this year. If you click on that link and go to that site, just fill out the form. Let us know which of the last 2 you'd be interested in and what some of those topics are. Always looking to get additional voices out into the market. As we wrap this up, if you haven't submitted any questions yet, please do that now. I also wanted to share with you that you can see upcoming in, I guess it's towards the end of November, we will be having the Discover 2016 London event. Again, go ahead and click here and you can receive a membership discount for signing up if you are a member of Vivit Worldwide. But there's going to be a lot of great conversations there. As you can see, more than 10,000 IT executives and others from around predominantly EMEA, but we also pull in a number of people from APJ and the Americas at this event. I know that I will be speaking on 2 sessions. I will also be representing the Vivit community there as well. This highlighting a little bit more of the top 10 reasons why you would want to consider participating and attending in the Discover 2016 event, and the specific dates, the 29 November through the 1st of December. So I guess, Jonathan, are you seeing any questions coming through? I know we've got about 2 minutes for questions before we wrap up. I'm going to leave it onto the thank you slide here where you can learn more about Vivit, or if you wanted to get more specifically about the Performance Engineering SIG, you can just follow that bit.ly link.
Thanks, Todd. So we've only got a single question, which is kind of around can we provide the slides to the materials that obviously we kind of accelerated through to fit it within that hour, because obviously people's time is quite precious. I've responded that it's available on the Vivit community site, and will be which I think that link will go into the Performance Engineering group. Todd has already mentioned that he's going to follow up with a blog on there about what we've done in this session and make those slides available. So, if you guys who aren't already registered, feel free to just jump onto that channel now. We know we had a great attendance. I'd like to thank everyone who's attended, and I'll pass back over to Todd unless we get any more questions through.
Yeah, are those slides a replacement for education?
That's
Education
a great.
Is not a replacement for experience.
So this has been an ongoing conversation that a number of us have had, and it is not a replacement. So even if you go through the slide deck, that does not mean you're certified in anything, I think is what we're trying to suggest. But I think, when you look at the mentorship, the stewardship, those types of programs, that's one of the reasons that we're out here doing what we're doing. But now we want to share this information with you, some of the things we've learned and others have learned and published. So again, Wilson and Eric, I love it. But I guess on behalf of Vivit Worldwide and the Performance Engineering SIG, I would like to graciously thank Wilson, Jonathan, and Eric all for participating today, as well as all the preparation that led up to today's event. As you would imagine, with this level of content, this is a lot of work. Again, I know it's a passion for all of us on the line, but again, on behalf of Vivid Worldwide, I would like to thank you all for your participation. And again, as a community, if there's more we can be doing, please give us the feedback, but we look forward to continuing the conversation with all of you. So again, thank you all for your time, and we'll catch you again at the next Performance Engineering SIG. Thank you.